That's it. Well done.
People are signing in. Delighted to see so many people interested in this. I'm going to go to share screen straight away and go to the main PowerPoint that we're going to be working from this afternoon. This is basically a starting point, as I see it, that we have a big issue with pupils who have special educational needs and disabilities just being disapplied and getting no chance to learn the language at all. So, and the subtitle, Success and Enjoyment, is absolutely essential, because if the children don't enjoy it, they're going to drop it as soon as they can. And we don't want that. We want it to be enjoyable and successful, and it can be. Below, at the bottom of this slide, is my email. You're welcome to contact me. You're welcome to use the chat. If I can't answer any questions now, I will do so later. If you're viewing this on the recording, then I have a hand raised. Now, I don't know how I can take a question. Carmen, can you unmute, please? Carmen first then, please, if I can hear you. If you unmute.
John, you can't ask the audience to unmute. They don't have that option. So right. they need to contribute in the chat.
Need, please, to contribute through the chat. This is the only way that we can do it with this particular format. But I promise that if I will answer any questions that I can't answer during the session later. I will get back to you, particularly if we have any snags. There is my email. So if you email me there, I will definitely promise to reply as soon as possible. We now have 60 participants. If I have a quick look at the chat while people are Hola, desde la Isla de White. Oh, lovely, Claire. And Pamela, hello, everybody. You clicked it by mistake, Carmen. Never mind. I've done much more damaging things than that. So that's fine. So, okay. I think that people have had a chance to sign in. The numbers are still rising signing in. But we will move to the first slide, which is to consider what we mean by SEND. Who is it that has special educational needs and disabilities? And the most important thing here, and this is the official DFE definition, which comes from the original 1981 Education Act, if they have a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age, or they have a disability which prevents or hinders them from making use of the facilities. Now, most often these two things go together. They don't always. But the whole point here is that these children generally have a significantly greater difficulty in learning and almost always have problems with literacy. That has to be considered. We can't expect the same pattern of progress from someone with a serious learning difficulty that we would for someone who didn't. That seems obvious to me. But it's one that we've got to bear in mind. And we've also got to bear in mind the practicalities, because the law requires schools to make reasonable adjustments to take account of the need or disability. And reasonable adjustment to me doesn't mean turning the whole school upside down. I know that some parents really do want the whole school system to change, but it's not reasonable to ask for that. And it's not what I'm suggesting at all. But children are entitled to a broad and balanced curriculum. And that is one thing that Ofsted was clear about. And if large numbers of children are not getting a fair chance to learn a language, then that is likely to attract criticism from Ofsted. It's not just my personal view, but HMCI has made that clear. And I think it's right. because children are entitled to a broad and balanced curriculum. I've done a lot of work with children with special needs since the early 70s. And I'll tell you just a little bit about that. I was teaching in inner London, and somebody, as they used to say at the time, bunked off my class. I was a young teacher. I wasn't a very good one at that time. I think I've improved. I hope I have. I know I've improved that. I went to see him, and I found out he couldn't read and that nobody was doing anything about it. And it was a moment of a sort of road to Damascus for me. I felt that I had to do something about it. I couldn't walk past somebody that couldn't read. And I actually think that the main justification for teaching a language is that we can address the learning difficulty as well as teaching the language if we do it in this particular way, which is consistent with the brain research. We have to some extent to understand both. But I do know that children who've told me that, you know, something like, oh, I don't do French, or I don't do languages, are very pleased when I say, well, look, I'll teach you some French. I'll teach you some Spanish. I'm not saying making rash promises, but then they can do it because people don't like being excluded, being told they can't do something at all. And I'm suggesting really that what we need to do is to make the kind of provision that's going to fit in with what the school needs and match to their learning needs. And I also think that children should be allowed to make an informed choice. To make languages compulsory for somebody with a learning difficulty is a very difficult thing to do because for some it's not going to be possible, and some are just not going to take to it. But the choice should be informed. They shouldn't have to make a decision that they're not going to do it at all without being given a chance. So I'm all for giving people a chance. As I say at the bottom, provision must address the learning difficulty, particularly in literacy. And that is quite easy to do, actually, provided well, let's see how far you agree with what I'm saying. Who can learn a new language? A person who has good understanding of spoken English or of their own first language. I did once observe on inspection a child with Down syndrome in a French class in year 7. The child was sitting with a teaching assistant who was going through a picture of a house and talking to the child in English. This child had no idea at all of what French was, and very little idea indeed of even the symbolism and the drawing of the house. All that was happening in that lesson was that the child was disturbing everybody else, the assistant was, and wasn't learning anything at all. I don't like that. We've got to make sure that children have got a reasonable chance of understanding. And I've also said who do not have serious or profound general learning difficulties. There's a wonderful petition that's just come out for these children to be taught to read, because there are times when it's possible to get through that barrier. But in general, if somebody can't understand what they're doing, there is no point in forcing them to do it. That is just making failure compulsory, and I don't believe in that. So, what are the principles? First of all, we need to be consistent with what we know about how the brain operates. And this book, The Learning Brain, Blakemore and Frith, 2005, Frith is now FRS, and I think Sarah Jane Blakemore she's not, will be shortly. They have this diagram, which shows brain cells reaching out and forming connections with them. And these build into networks, and the network connections are strengthened with practice. This is what's happening when we're learning absolutely anything, and it is the key, the absolute key to learning a new language. Once we understand this, we can go with what makes the connections and avoid what doesn't. As we practice, the connections have this layer of myelin, which is an insulator and speeds things up, laid down on them. And this is done by specialist brain cells. It's actually been filmed in rats. The process has been filmed of these brain cells through a microscope, actually depositing this myelin. And it's an insulator, and it's wonderful. And this genius, Eric Kandel, discovered something else. He discovered, and his book, In Search of Memory, The Emergence of the New Science of Mind, a wonderful history of brain research, is a great book. You can get it through bookfinder.org because it's not been published in the UK, unfortunately. He found that when, with repeated practice, the brain cell will actually form a new connection, much like a bud on a branch of a tree. And I think that is fantastic. That is so encouraging. And it's consistent also with the evidence that learning a second language helps you a great deal with, with later life problems of dementia, because you're actually making more connections. You've got more there. And I think it's an example of what somebody said in the military context. The more you use, the less you use, the less you lose. So Kandel's worth reading. And our own Medical Research Council's Applied Psychology Unit, Dr. Matt Davis, has this very, very interesting, if not very, very clear photograph of the areas of the brain that are active when we're speaking, when we're hearing words, and when we're reading them, and both. Now, the key is that when children are hearing the words, the blue areas are active. You can see those clearly enough. And when they're reading them aloud, the red areas are active. But the key is, well, first, they're so close together, but you can see these purple areas. They're very small, but they're at the junction, right at the interaction between these two. So these areas of the brain overlap. We do not have 4 skills in learning language. We have channels of communication which use the same areas of the brain. And once we understand that, then we can maximize the application of brain power to the task of learning the language. I'm suggesting that as we learn a new language, we add to and adapt the ideas and neural networks we learned in our first. This is actually very important for phonics, because children generally already know a fair amount of English phonics, so they don't have to learn these things from scratch. That's helpful. But the structures in our first language influence the things, the way we learn the new one, and both the parts we find easy and the errors that we make. Now, this is important for children learning English as a second language, for which there is this brilliant summary in Swan Smith Learner English. I do recommend that book. And its significance for learning generally is in this book, How We Learn by Stanislas Dehaene. And Stanislas is professor at the Collège de France, which is a wonderful institution, totally independent of everybody, and they elect their own professors. And Stanislas, I think, is one of the leading neuroscientists in Europe, and I recommend everything. I also recommend this particular book, his latest, How We Learn. And I'm actually very pleased to say that he strongly approved of the review that I wrote of it, so that might be a starting point for you. If he approved of it, presumably he didn't think it was inaccurate. So English speakers need to adapt to new relationships between written and spoken language, including spelling and pronunciation. They meet gender in nouns that don't have a physical gender, which they don't in English, and in associated pronouns and adjectives. I call these companion words for teaching purposes, and they have greater variation in verb forms than they do in English, except for Mandarin, strangely enough. I don't know if any of you have looked at Mandarin. I happen to have the pleasure and privilege of being a member of the Mandolin Excellence Project Steering Group. And one of the things one finds in Mandarin is that they have very little grammar as we know it at all. The sound system has been historically the difficult thing in learning Mandarin, and there are ways through that, which I'm happy to discuss if anybody wants to get in touch later. But Mandarin, the verbs just don't change very much. It's wonderful in some ways. Now, so what we're doing is we're promoting the formation and extension of networks in children's minds. And we do this by, first of all, understanding the adjustments they need to make to their thinking, which I've just set out some of the key ones, explaining these clearly in terms that children can understand. We need clear and attractive presentation. We need to teach the spoken and written language together so that children can see the links between them. And we need, I think, to encourage and answer questions. I always make time for children to ask me questions, because if they ask me questions, then I get a clear idea of what they understand, what they don't, and of things that they might think they understand but don't. And encouraging them to practice. none of us, I think, ever learned a language just by going to classes. It's what we did in addition to going to classes. That practice that helped to put down the myelin on the new connections, that helped to build this growth that Kandel has identified. So we've got to find ways of doing that. And I think that is actually much easier than it used to be because of some of the technology that's available to us. Some practices make life much more difficult. First of all, copying, which requires children to switch their attention all the time between the master version and their own. This jerky movement makes it much more difficult for them to form connections. And secondly, by overloading, presenting too much new material at a time, or presenting spoken language that's too fast for children to understand. This has been a besetting sin of language teaching for decades, and it hinders children of all abilities. The idea that it doesn't matter if they don't understand something fully, to me, is an error. What they don't understand will come back to bite them, and bite you as a teacher, or bite me as a teacher every time I've ever tried to fudge anything. And as my great friend, my late friend, I'm sorry to say, Michel Thomas, whose methods I recommend for learning Mandarin, among other things, but certainly Spanish is brilliant. He said that what you understand, you don't forget. And I think that's a principle. This is what happened in one Year 7 mixed ability class that I observed in a language college some time ago. But this was the head of department's class, and you can see that in jerking backwards and forwards, the child has not actually copied from the right place, hasn't a clue of what they're doing, and is in trouble. This is not learning a language. That's what they were supposed to do, and this was beside each one of them and on the board. This is what they do. Où habite-t-on? Comment t'appelles-tu? And that, you see, they've even put an accent on the end of tu, which doesn't happen, of course, in French. These children are not understanding what they're doing, they're wasting their time. So, which language? First of all, there are advantages and disadvantages to all of the main languages that are taught in schools. The first one is that because of the Norman conquest, around 1/3 of French words are shared or nearly shared with English. These are easy to learn and contribute to literacy if they're taught. In fact, I think this is essential if we are going to tackle basic reading problems. And I always start with the example of table. I had a child that I was teaching last week, assistant dyslexic, starts to read table as table. And he's looking for tablet, but there's no T. Of course, table is the French phonics pronunciation of table. It's regular phonics, but it's French phonics. And if we teach French as the main language, we have a disadvantage in pronunciation, which I will show you how to tackle if you want to, if you're interested. I'm sure you are, sorry. But we also have a huge number of shared words between French and English, so that will really help their English reading if we do this. And I'm very happy actually to demonstrate that to any class. When I say I'll do things pro bono, anything I do over the Zoom to help you in any way is pro bono. And that can include tackling dyslexia in English or anything that your colleagues want. Second thing is that once its patterns are understood, French grammar is quite consistent and becomes easier once we're past the initial stages. But the tricky part of it is that French has a large number of silent letters, about 4 times as many as an equivalent passage of English. It ties groups of words tightly together grammatically, and it's got a very different system of pronunciation. So at the outset, this makes French more difficult unless these differences are carefully explained and taught, and I will do my best to show you how to explain and teach them. Spanish is actually recommended by the British Dyslexia Association, and it is easier in the initial stages because it has almost no silent letters, a simple vowel system, and highly regular spelling. You don't have vowel combinations in Spanish as you do in English. But Spanish people, yes, sorry, there's no but, the but will come later. Spanish people don't take shortcuts when they speak, so the spoken and written language correspond closely. If you write down what you can hear, it's going to be right most of the time. It has a good number of shared words with English, so not quite as many as French, and positive associations in people's minds through holidays. Sunny Spain. The bad news of Spanish is that spoken Spanish is about 30% more syllables per 100 words than English, but the same number of words per minute. So the pronunciation, so it goes faster. They have to cram more in. And Spanish at full speed is very, very, very difficult for a beginner, as some of you may have already found. The pronunciation is very different. It is very different from English. We have some letters which are different. French don't really. Spanish grammar is no simpler than French once you get past the early stages, and in some respects it's more complex. Spanish people get insulted if they're told their language is easy, because it really isn't if it's going to be done properly. And that's one reason why the rush to Spanish at GCSE has stalled. Once you get past the initial stages, Spanish is just as hard work as any other language. And as I said, some letters are not pronounced as they are in English. Final note on German: if your school does German, the spelling's regular. The patterns of pronunciation are closer to those of English than those of Spanish or French. And Germany is economically powerful. You'll have heard the expression, Spanish for holidays, German for work. The downside of German is that the grammar is complex and its mastery requires long practice from native speakers. It has neuter as well as masculine and feminine genders, and the companion words in these categories, the articles and things, they're not consistent, so that der is sometimes feminine. Die Donau becomes an der schönen blauen Donau, for example, and this takes a lot of practice. And the final point is that a good deal of German vocabulary is derived from Eastern European sources, and that's got no links to English, so it's harder to learn. So after we decided which language, what do the children need? They need teaching that addresses their learning difficulties. They need a carefully designed scheme of work based on small steps, reinforced and practiced through interesting and varied activities. They need personalized content and reinforcement of learning through well-considered praise. Praise needs to be used as a smart bomb. We don't praise them for trying, we praise them for what they get right and get them to think about what they need to do. They need opportunities for learning beyond lessons, clubs, contact with native speakers, and they need to know that they're succeeding. One of the first lessons I observed somebody else teaching had a teacher say to a class, say to a child, "Comment t'appelles-tu?" And the child just said back, "Comment t'appelles-tu?" He didn't realize he was being asked a question. The teacher expected him to answer with his name, and the teacher just said "excellent" and moved on. Well, it wasn't excellent, it was confusion. And this is why I think that the focal point for research in languages now needs to be on these very first lessons. Because once you start off with confusion, it's very difficult to deal with it. We need to find ways of avoiding the confusion in the first place. These are what teachers need. And the first one, you will have heard of something called cognitive load theory. They need a clear understanding what their pupils can and can't be expected to do. You cannot expect the kind of pattern of progress that's expected in the national census from children with special educational needs, because they don't bring enough to the table to learn like that. We have to go with what they can do. And what they can do is a lot. Lessons lasting, the timetabling in modern languages at the moment is disastrous. Lessons lasting an hour have too many gaps between them for effective learning, and that means that we need learning beyond lessons for these people and all of them. The timetabling in secondary schools is based on limiting movement around the school and nothing else at the moment, and that's a serious problem. And I say most schools, not all. A high standard of subject knowledge, including where the pinch points are. We've got to know where something's going to be difficult and plan a route through it. We need attractive technology and resources so that work can be presented clearly and pupils don't copy. Again, these are available, and I'll show you in a moment. And we need, above all, encouragement from the head teacher, and the SLT members who are responsible for languages need to understand them. This is not always the case. I've seen SLT members from science departments put in charge of languages, and and expect the same sort of progress they see in physics. It's ridiculous, but it has happened. So I'm going to have to stop sharing for just a second because I'm going to have to locate the PowerPoint that I use first. It won't take me a second. At least I hope it will not take me a second. Right, it's going to take me a little longer, but I'm grateful. I should have loaded this earlier. I'm sorry I forgot to do this one. But here is my first PowerPoint for teaching French. I'm going to have to zoom. I'm going to have to share screen again and go to this. Now, okay. We start off with colors. Rouge. Immediately, probably the strongest color. And we'll go around the classroom looking at things that are rouge. Who thinks this is rouge? And then I'll point to something that's green. And who thinks this is rouge? I'll point to something that's blue. So rouge. And at a very early stage, next one, I'm going to go to bleu. Who thinks that looks like an English word? Well, what's the difference? And of course, you've got one of the most high frequency French sounds out, that and euro, Europe. So bleu. Right. Now have a good look at bleu. Now trace, and then I will minimize it so they can't see blur again. I'm just doing it like that. Now trace it on your sleeve. Who thinks they got it right? Have another look. Who thinks they got it nearly right? Because the glass is always half full if they've got something right. Who thinks they got it dead right? Brilliant. Bleu. So they've written something in French, they haven't copied it, and they've got it right. So then I'd look at other things that are maybe, who thinks this one is rouge? Who thinks it's bleu? So we're getting the French pronunciation right. We're getting a new French sound. We're getting a connection with English, because bleu is really just the two letters the other way around. And then blanc. And blanc. What is it we don't pronounce in blanc? Oh, it's the C. Where is it? It's at the end of the word. So this is the introduction, the French not pronouncing a letter at the end of the word. And then we'll make it as nearly a shared word because we'll put up blank. Right, just write blanc on your sleeve. Again, looking away from the board, I'll always minimize this. I can't do it as we're doing it at the moment because it's going to muck the slide share up, the share screen up. But then just look away, blanc. Who got it right? Right. Wonder if we could have a trace of bleu, blanc, rouge. Good. There. Again, new French pronunciation. T this time at the end of the word, not pronounced. Same thing. And then you go around the classroom. Who thinks this is bleu? Who thinks it's vert? Who thinks it's rouge? And they'll get it right. Because you're putting in the position of giving them a small step. The meaning is self-evident here, so they've only got to adjust the way that they're pronouncing it, and you've made it very easy. Who's threatened by writing something on their sleeve with the finger? Nobody. And then, if you think that they're getting it right, well, how about writing it on a whiteboard, on a piece of scrap paper? Who thinks they got it right? This idea that they can do it, they can make the adjustment, we do that by making the adjustment as easy for them as possible. Now, here we have jaune. Jaune, again, a new French vowel sound. We don't really have quite that in English, and we have all these things that are jaune, and we here have la poste. Now, who thinks that's a bit like an English word? Of course it is. The post, yeah, let's just shut the knee on the end, haven't we? It's la poste. Good. Noir. And orange. Orange. Look at that one. Trace that one in your sleeve. Who thinks that's like an English word? Oh. But it's exactly the same thing. It's not a cognate, it's a shared word. We just pronounce it differently. And here you've got marron, slightly differently, but the double R there, and the N, the low N, keeping your tongue on marron. We practice that. so that when we come to bonjour, they're already knowing that they're not keeping their tongue out and no, they're dropping it. So it's easy, it's natural, and they can do it. I'm going to have to stop share now and share screen again and return to the original PowerPoint. Now here we have my starting point. French likes its spoken language to be smooth and its written language to be precise. Who thinks that to say je ai is smooth? Who thinks it's a bit jerky? Yeah. So instead of je ai, we take off that first E and we've got je. Okay. Again, minimize it, write that on your sleeve. Je. Who got it right? And then there's an apostrophe and apostrophe. And they can have. Again, you see, they've got to make the choice. I don't give them a predetermined chunk ever. They understand that why they're doing j'ai un chat or un chien. Now, this clicker, there is a demo of it on YouTube, and there's a reference to this at the end of the presentation. Once you've got that one, you can take it further. So the same thing with some very bright children was, I've got a kitten. All right, I've got a very little kitten. So I can just add these. I'm in complete control of the content. I add tout petit. J'ai un tout petit chaton. And then, but my kitten's so small, you can hardly hear it. So j'ai un chaton minuscule. But you notice that I'm putting them in the right order in French, so that minuscule comes after chaton and the others before it. That is really the key, because we can use clicker then to move out in any direction that we choose. Now, further aids in practice, I'm going to move quite quickly here. BBC Bitesize. I did help write that, so I'm biased up to a point, but it's got small steps, it's nicely presented, it's good fun, and they can use it. And using things like this helps you to break up a long lesson. If you're having to teach a lesson that's longer than you choose, this will help you. Bitesize is good. I'm also recommending thinking about Rosetta Stone. It also has small steps. It's not free. Of course, Bitesize is free, which is I always find is a good price. But Une fille, un garçon has got clear grammatical progression, and it can use it to reinforce your teaching. So it's worth considering. I'm looking to set up some research with them at the moment. We'll see if they agree to it. Duolingo, children enjoy, also for practice. People will have seen one called Language Nut, and I found that when I used that in Hackney, the children were happy to do it for homework rather. There's one called a Green Mouse, which has got good cultural content. They've got a lovely one of making one of these Spanish balloons, which you put papier mâché around the balloon, paint faces on it, burst the balloon, you've got a lovely papier mâché face. Good for use. I have produced toolkits for Spanish, French, and German, which are on my site, and they are based on this idea of clear progression, so that the adjustments to thinking that you make when moving from one language to another are made clear from the first lesson. We're already speaking, we know what English sounds are, look how we modify them for French. And then, of course, with Send, I'm going to be building up their knowledge of how these patterns apply in English, so that, for example, the most obvious one, anything in TION is almost always the same word in English. And I say almost always, of course, because very few things in language are perfectly consistent. Languages are human, they have human foibles. Foible, the old French spelling of faible, weak, and a little weakness. French changed their spelling of that, we didn't, but that's for another time. At a very early stage, I encourage a positive and negative sentence. So, and I usually do that with I know or I don't know. And I'll say, I'll give them alternatives. Je sais, je ne sais pas. So I know when my birthday is. Je sais. I know how to get home at night. Je sais. I know how many cars are parked in the street outside. Je ne sais pas. I know how many stars are in the sky. Je ne sais pas. And this little bit, getting them used to a positive and negative, and I use pas maintenant Bernard, not now Bernard, as a to practice that. Bernard est le monstre. is the French translation, and that works well too. So everything is easy. Each step is carefully considered. You do not hit them, and hit them is not the word. You do not give them things that they're not going to be able to understand and build on what they've already known. Here are a couple of examples. This child, an old example, but still a good one. Year 7 girl assessed as dyslexic. This is before she started sentence building work. She's being asked to write what she can write in French in about 5 minutes, and she's written this, and it's not French. She's then been asked to write what she thinks of writing French and English, and that is really almost indistinguishable. And then the sad thing about this, I could write more. She's not lost interest. She wants to do it. Now, after just a short period of sentence building using the techniques I've shown, she was writing that. Now, it's not perfect. It's still got mistakes in it, but it looks French. And when I presented this at Strasbourg University, which is a conference a good few years ago now, they were astonished. But look at this. J'ai un petit oiseau jaune qui s'appelle Copper. And look, she's written qui s'appelle correctly, because I've based it on her own experience and things that are important to her. She's taken the trouble to get it right. And this was, of course, not copied at all. They never copy. Copying is an absolute dead loss for children who've got learning difficulties. Year 7 boy assesses dyslexic. This is his first lesson in Spanish. First lesson with me in Spanish. You can see you get very fast, immediate progress in Spanish. And you notice that he's got the tilde on años. So he's beginning to understand how to adjust his thinking. Higher attaining children can take this and run for it. It works for everybody. The toolkits are here. Clicker 7. There is a link on this PowerPoint. If you copy that to my demonstration, but I'm happy to demonstrate to any department. Zim Zam Zoom is what I'm going to finish with. I'm going to stop sharing again. I'm going to leave you with a song from Zim Zam Zoom, which children like so much. This is one of the sorry, I'm going to, sorry, and people can't tell me if they can see this or not. I don't want to do that. I do want to go to Zoom. Here, I want to share screen again and share sound. I hope that means you can see this. This is the most wonderful, popular resource. Its writers lost a lot of money for it. I have copies, and I will, we will try and persuade them to have it again. But just watch this for an exercise in counting in French. I think you'll love it. Sorry, I'm just going to check something. I am sharing sound. Oops, I don't want that either. Sorry, back and back again. This is really subtle. The children love it. I hope it's going to work nicely this time.
La la.
children really pick up on the subtlety of that cartoon, and they really enjoy it. Now, I've got just a couple of minutes. You'll have johnbald50 at gmail.com. I'm going to post the PowerPoint on my site, so just Google me, you'll get to it. That'll be there in a couple of minutes. It's got my email address. I'm never going to be able to respond to 25 things in the chat in 4 minutes, but I will respond to any emails, and I will help you in any way that I possibly can. As you may have gathered, I'm getting on in years. And thank you, Claire, to everyone. I'm glad you liked that song. The others are just as good. When we showed that in Hackney, believe me, the children were rocking around the place, singing it all the time. You couldn't stop them. Teaching SEND pupils in a mixed ability class. It is extremely difficult to do that. And it helps if you've got an assistant. If the assistant needs to know the language, it should be on their CPD. Thank you, Pamela, for that. No copying indeed. If the assistant can work with you consistently and learn the language themselves, that will help. I have taught assistants language. I have some wonderful contacts in France and Spain. If you want to do that, to get their feet on the ground there, it should be in their CPD. Thank you for, I just saw that came up and went that somebody had used that song too and guarantees that it was loved by everybody. It really is. And you can actually count up to 20 brilliantly by controlling. You use the pause button to let them respond and then go. The other great thing about Zim Zam Zoom is that, and there is a Spanish one. It's not quite as good as the Spanish one, but it is okay. They've got two. You see it as well as hear it. It's very important that the spoken and written are presented at the same time, so that children can see the links between them, and then they practice and they enjoy it. They leave the language with a smile, the lesson with a smile on their face. I think that's so important. Somebody at a conference that I was at, a very well-known school, said we have a lot of tears in the first term. I do not want tears. I want a smile on children's faces. They're going out the door singing that song or some other song or something else like that. I'll say, pas maintenant Bernard, pas maintenant Bernard. And getting the pronunciation, they're learning, they know that they are learning, and they're happy, and so am I. Because there's no happiness in teaching in impossible conditions. Mixed ability, I think, is to be avoided. But if children are disapplied, this is my final point, a bespoke course for them in the summer term after the other children have left will work very well. And they will learn more effectively like that than they will in a, thank you very much, Pamela, than they will more effective than they will in sitting something that they pursue a lesson they don't understand. Children must understand their work fully at all times. Michel Thomas, my late friend, I'm sorry to say, Michel Thomas was right. What you understand, you don't forget. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for your kind comments. Do please keep in touch. I will do my best to help anybody I can. Lots of people saying thank you very much. I'm pleased that you found it useful. Thank you, Edmund. De nada. Con plaisir. À la prochaine, j'espère. I think I've got to go, but I'll leave it to the organizers to turn this off because I'm enjoying what people are putting in these comments. It really is very, very gratifying because there's 50 years work behind this. Yes, Claire, the single words are only in the very first lesson. As soon as they have got that pronunciation correct, then we move straight into sentence building. And you can either use Clicker for it, or you can put things on blank playing cards and blue tack. And I hope you will have the recording for this session because a lot of people have signed up for it and are going to watch it later. So thank you very much. 64 comments in the chat. Any link to Clicker? Yes, there will be a link to Clicker. You can Google Clicker, and you will get to it. You can get a free sample of that, a free test. But yes, you will get that quickly. But you can also click on the link I gave you, and you'll see my demo of how to set it up for a language. This is quite tricky. It's not straightforward first thing, but then you can, because you're in control. After a couple of sessions, it becomes really quite easy. I'm delighted, Claudia, that you have ordered the books by Kandel and Dehane, because they're very good books, and they will help colleagues as well. Dehane, I think, is definitely one of the leading thinkers in Europe. And it works. His description of learning exactly fits how people with learning difficulties have to learn to read in English as well. In fact, how we all do, because we've got to cope with things that don't quite fit. And his idea is that we get an idea of how things are based on our experience, and then we have to adjust it when something doesn't fit. So when we're expecting tablet, we've got tablet. Why? We explain and unpack and explain everything. So again, thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to leave now, and I'm going to post the PowerPoint. Au revoir.